Welcome to Village Church Connections. I'm David Pavey. In the 18th century, John Wesley crisscrossed England, riding over 250,000 miles on horseback, preaching the message of the Bible over 40,000 times, while his brother Charles wrote over 6,000 hymns. Another itinerant evangelist, George Whitefield, also preached God's Word in England to multiple thousands of hearers. It was Whitefield, in fact, who first took the courageous step of preaching outdoors rather than restricting himself to church buildings, reaching out first to the coal miners around Bristol and then to the street poor of London, impacting the unchurched masses, and John Wesley followed his example. The 18th century in France, however, was very different. There, the secular philosophers Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Voltaire and others were spewing out teaching that left God out of the picture. Rousseau taught that man was intrinsically good but corrupted by society. He published a book entitled Émile, in which he laid out the theories on proper child rearing. But he fathered 5 illegitimate children before consigning each one of them to a home for abandoned children shortly after they were born. Voltaire relentlessly attacked the Catholic Church and Christianity as a whole, and his personal life was a revolving door of mistresses, paramours, and long-term lovers. Historians call this period in France the Enlightenment. But shortly after both men died, and largely due to their writing, the bloodbath known as the French Revolution broke out. The king was executed, terror reigned for a decade, and Napoleon came to power, which led to multiple foreign wars. Margaret Thatcher claimed that all the revolution gave France was a pile of headless corpses. Perhaps Rousseau and Voltaire were not as enlightened as we have been led to believe. 2 countries, England and France, 2 influences, Christian and secular. I know very little about bowling, but this I do know, that while that heavy ball is perfectly round, it will always run off course due to a built-in bias, and there's a bias to do evil in all of us. That's a story as old as that of Adam and Eve. In the Old Testament of the Bible, in 2 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 14, it is said of King Rehoboam of Judah that he did evil because he had not set his heart on seeking the Lord. Like a bowling ball, he drifted off course and did evil, and because he was a leader, others were influenced by his failure. He and all Israel with him abandoned the law of the Lord. So the nation became subject to King Shishak of Egypt, who raided the temple and carried off all its treasures. The road to true enlightenment involves setting our hearts on seeking the Lord. So there's a lesson here for all of us. Man is not intrinsically good, as Rousseau should have known. We're born with a bias. The antidote to evil is not avoiding society, but setting one's heart on seeking the Lord. Had Rehoboam determined to seek the Lord, he could have largely overridden the effect of his bias. While they were still young men at Oxford University, the Wesley brothers and George Whitefield set their hearts on seeking the Lord and serving Him. They put their hand to the plow and they never looked back. The result was not only that England was spared from revolution, others were blessed as the founders of Methodism expanded their ministry beyond the British Isles to preach the message of God's grace in the American colonies. This initiative contributed to what became known as the Great Awakening in the New World. There's a remarkable verse in John's Gospel where Jesus said, "I do always those things that please the Father." His heart was set on seeking God's will. As Western culture yields to the bias and sinks deeper and deeper into secular thinking and corrupt behavior, we need to heed the Apostle Paul's advice to the Romans, as recorded in the paraphrase entitled The Message. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants you to do and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. Let's follow the Wesleys and Whitefield rather than Rousseau and Rehoboam, setting our hearts on seeking the Lord. Beware of the bias. And thank you for tuning in to Village Church Connections.